Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser, and welcome back to the Journey of My Mother's Son podcast. I'm joined with Jason Curtis, or maybe better known as Coach Curtis, who is the founder of the SCC Academy. Jason, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on. Great to be here.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Joining me from across the pond. So I always love having international guests on the show. But before we get started, just introduce yourself to the listeners. Who is Jason today?
So I'm Jay, also known as Coach Curtis. So I'm a gym owner in the UK. I own a strength and conditioning gym, and I'm also a published author. So I've published around 20 books on health and fitness and sports performance. And I run an academy, which is all about making education accessible. So I have an Instagram page, which we have over 100,000 followers. And the reason we've built up that kind of following is because I give away free content. 3 times a week, I give away ebooks. So my aim with education was to sort of take a much higher level of sort of strength and conditioning, so elite level of fitness, but brought right down to everyone's level and make it accessible to the masses. That was my initial aim when it came to setting up my gym after I left the military, because I was a physical training instructor in the army, is I wanted to have a gym that sort of delivered more advanced forms of training or more sort of elite levels of training, but to the average Joe, because the way I see it is average isn't average anymore. There's a lot more people that are doing, sporting events or tough mudders at the weekend or Spartan events or the running marathons or ultra marathons. So I wanted to provide these people with what they wanted, which was, I often call them sort of professional amateurs. So they're amateur athletes, but they sort of want that professional approach. So that was initially my drive with the gym. And then I realized after running the gym for a few years that I had a real passion for education and not just coaching people, but teaching people how to be coaches and how to be better coaches or train like athletes. And that's why I developed my academy, so the Strength and Conditioning Course Academy. And that's where we sort of upskill both fitness professionals and enthusiasts to be the best coaches they can be. And in short, that's what I do and what I'm here for.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. So tell me a little bit about that transition. So you're in the British Army for, I think, 7 years, and you get out of the Army and you determine to yourself that you're gonna open a gym. What was that process like? I mean, you know, what type of capital did you need to get it started up? I mean, how did you go about that process and that transfer from the military to entrepreneurship and in the gym space?
So basically, to be honest, the real key was naive optimism. So I had in my head that I was, being an ex-army physical training instructor, and I'm very qualified and very experienced within my field. I thought I was going to leave the army, and everyone was going to be running to me for training because I was an ex-army PTI. And it wasn't the case. So when I left the army, I was very qualified, very experienced, but I didn't actually have any money. And I actually, the deposit that I paid for the flat that I was renting um, was on a credit card. So I was actually in debt when I left the army. And my decision was to start running boot camps in a park. And then once I developed a big enough client base, I'd then sort of rent a small studio and build up from there. So it was literally sort of take the leap and grow your wings on the way down. And that was because I was so confident in what I could do. However, after leaving the army, I was running boot camps on the park. First park session, no one turned up. Second park session, or it might have been 2 or 3 in, I had one person turn up. The problem was sort of after a few weeks of running this boot camp, my gearbox in my van broke down. So the gearbox went, I had to scrap the van because I couldn't afford to fix it. So I was sort of left in a really bad place. And luckily, I knew a boxing gym in the town, and I asked to store my kit there because I didn't have a van anymore to lug my kit around. So I ended up storing my kit in this old industrial mill. Where I live is called the Silk Town. So it's actually the official end of the Silk Road from China in the UK. So it's full of big mills and stuff like that. So I stored all my kit there. And luckily enough, the owner of the mill said, look, you can have that room for 40 quid a week, £40 a week, around $50 or $60. And I said, well, I can't really afford it. So he said, I'll give you 3 months rent free. So I took that room and started sort of pushing myself out of there. And it took me about 3 or 4 months to get, 3 or 4 clients. I was really struggling. And at this point, I also got divorced from my ex-wife. So I had nowhere really to stay. I had friends and family I could stay with, but it was a little bit of pride. So there was often times where I was sleeping in my car, and then sort of going between different places. But eventually I started to get really busy. So what was the key for me was not really marketing or anything like that or having money. It was just once I got the initial clients in, sort of word spread, and then it was all word of mouth. And then before I knew it, I was doing about 40 to 50 hours of personal training a week, which is charging around anywhere from sort of $40 to $50 an hour. So that's when I started to sort of see sort of some level of financial success. And at that point was when I actually got an investor. And what was the funny thing about that was my first client that came to the boot camp, she promised me for a long time that she'd bring her sisters. And when we transitioned into the room where I sort of set up my studio, she was only paying £5, $7 or $8 for the boot camp. But obviously, one-to-one training is a lot more, considered more expensive. So she said, "Oh, you can cancel my slot because it's a prime time slot in the evening, twice a week." And I said, "No, we'll keep you on. Just bring your sisters. You can all pay a fiver, and it'll be a small group session." Eventually, literally 6 months down the line, her sister came along. She was asking me about what the business was, all this sort of stuff. And eventually, long story short, she invested £50,000 into me setting up a large gym. So I then set up a large gym in the area, started to get clients. It was actually one of the people that I was training was an author and a publisher. So he specialized in guitars. So he publishes guitar books. He's a huge indie publisher on Amazon. And he explained to me about, I explained to him that I wanted to write a book. And he said, what's your plan? And I had this big tome that I wanted to write. I wanted to write a manual. And he was like, well, what's the first chapter? I said, the first chapter is this. And he says, well, write me a book on that. And if it's good enough, I'll publish it. And then from there, obviously, the rest is history. That's how I progressed then into, go more down the lines of education alongside just coaching.
That's awesome. In those early days where you're struggling and sleeping in your car, trying to make it happen, was there ever a time that you just wanted to quit and think, this wasn't for me? It's time to move on and do something else?
Yeah, I think because I'm so stubborn and I think it's that naive optimism as well. I'm very much like very optimistic and I always sort of see, right, it's going to get better. I think I'd never sort of give up. And I always knew this is for me, even from being a very young child. I knew I wanted a gym. I knew I wanted to join the military, but I wanted to have, a gym. I wanted to be in the fitness industry. I knew that very, very young. But the one thing I'd say was the financial stress. Like, this is why I can't tolerate the term sort of money doesn't buy happiness. And I completely agree with it in terms of, you can be rich and be miserable. But this idea, I think it's, people with money say you don't need money, but it certainly helps. And when you're broke, the stress levels were phenomenal, because I had a young baby as well, and it was beyond, I've never experienced that level of stress from anything. That financial stress was, could bring a man to tears. And that was the hardest part. And I still look back at that and go, like, when people say, oh, money's not important, anything like that, I'm just like, well, you've never been broke then. Because when you are really broke, it's horrendous. And I can honestly say there was nights where I felt like just breaking down and crying because I knew I just couldn't afford anything. And my credit card, the problem was when you have a credit card and you pay your rent, for example, on a credit card, or you buy some food on your credit card and it goes over, then they charge you. And then you're paying your credit card off and the charges are more than the sort of monthly amount you pay. So you're actually getting more debt, even though you're paying it off. And that is, I think, one thing that I'm very grateful for is I've experienced that. And I think it turns me into a better man, really. Someone with a lot more empathy, rather than if I think it wouldn't have been as good for me if I was to leave the army. I was, a physical training instructor in the army. So there was a lot of, it's a role that's respected and, everyone sort of not necessarily looks up to you, but you're not really going to mess with the person that's taking you on physical training every morning. You're going to be nice to that guy. So everyone's nice to you. And then if I left the army and just met success after success, I think I'd be, this is easy. Anyone could do this. All you got to do is post on social media. And like what I've realized is actually it's took me the best part of 10 years to get to a level where I'm like, okay, I'm starting to feel like I'm getting somewhere. And even now, there's financial strain coming out of COVID and stuff like that. So it's definitely given me a lot more humility. So I'm grateful for that, in all honesty.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. And I love the term you used, the naive optimism. Where a lot of times you just don't know any better. So you just,
Yeah.
you have that faith that it's all gonna work out for sure. So I love that approach. I mean, is that something like how did you develop that naive optimism? I mean, is it something that you learned from your parents or through the service? Like how did you, develop that uh,
I think
that characteristic?
I think in all honesty, I think it's a lot of it's inherent. So it's just someone's character, where I've always sort of seen stuff as, oh, it'll be fine, or and maybe it is a little, like I say, it is that element of optimism mixed with a little bit of naivety that you sort of think things will be all right. I always, even from being very young, it'd be fine. And sometimes it gets you in trouble because you maybe bury your head in the sand, like, oh, you need to sort this out, and you're like, no, it'll be fine, and then it's not fine. So there's definitely risk to it, but I think more than anything, I think it's quite inherent because I remember being there, quite young, thinking that way. And I think one of the problems I've found with business, which is both good and bad, is the hardships of owning my own businesses and them not being, incredibly successful straight away, or even now it's not like it's just churning in money nonstop. It That's maybe made me more cynical, where I sort of, if someone tells me that, look, we're going to invest 100 grand in you today or tomorrow, I'll believe it when I see it. And if someone says, I've got 50 friends that all want to join your gym, I'll take it with a pinch of salt. So I think inherently I've got that naive optimism because I'm just an optimistic person. But actually, business has made me a little bit more cynical. That if someone says, if you post good content every day, eventually you'll get noticed. Maybe you won't. Like, or if you work hard, I'm like, I've worked really hard on some aspects of my different businesses, and sometimes it's not worked, and I've put everything into it. So there's two sides to that. I think inherently I am optimistic, but business has made me a little bit cynical.
Right.
When people tell me stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, then growing from pretty much a one-man show to now, having a gym with a full staff, what were some of the growing pains that you went through with that? Because again, obviously, when it's just you, there's only,
Mm.
there's only one mouth to feed at that point, so to speak. But as you take on the responsibility of growing that business and growing that staff, now, there's a lot more pressure on that responsibility as well. What was that learning curve like for you?
So for me, the recurring theme is, it was like, the best way to describe it is, say as your profits and your business is growing, and you're sort of climbing that mountain, there's always a big ravine, and that's that ravine in cash flow where it's the catch 22, where to get bigger you've got to spend money, but to be, to spend the money, you've not got that money to spend to get bigger. So it's like, if you need more clients, you need to spend money on advertising, but you haven't got the money because you haven't got the clients. And I think what happens is, my biggest problem that I found in the UK, with the gym and whatnot, was just there's certain thresholds where your cash flow has to jump. And with my size of business, it's not like I get a few big deals and I'm like, right, my turnover has drastically improved. We've jumped that level. Mine's sort of this slow increment. So when it gets to the point where I need a new staff member, or I need, to inject more cash into something, that's just not there. So I've always got this catch 22 of, I need money to make money, but then it's getting to that point. And especially with staff and stuff like that, so you grow and you need more staff. And, I've always stood by, profits, sanity, and turnovers, vanity. And sometimes the problem with this industry, and I'm sure most industries, is, yes, your turnover might be going up as you grow, but actually your profit's not. You've got more stress and you're not better off. And that's often the case in this industry. You get all this big gym and all the staff, and actually you're not as comfortable as you were with a smaller gym. One of the beauties of the fitness industry is that a lot of the people work on a sort of subcontractor level. So a lot of my PTs will do 3 hours, in return of like gym use. So rather than paying gym rent, which can be quite expensive, they'll cover hours in the gym. So that's a very effective way in this industry to man hours and make sure that you're not paying a fortune in staff. Essentially, you've got lots of staff, but they're all subcontractors. So they're all coaches that are doing hours for you. And the most difficult thing is basically finding people that are good. And it's not just good at the job, it's people that have just got the right character, the right personality, because it's a face-to-face business. You're working with clients. It's just amazing how many people in this industry just might not fit to a certain gym, and that's really difficult to find people that are, good characters, lively people, but also very good coaches. And I'm sure realistically, every industry recruitment's one of the hardest areas. It's an area I really struggle with, in all honesty.
Yeah. How do you handle that situation when you bring a trainer in who you'd find out afterwards that they're not a perfect fit, or have you been able to create such a vetting process that hasn't been an issue for you?
Yeah, it's not been a major issue, but it's because sort of they don't sort of get as far through the door. You sort of cull it a little bit earlier. I've definitely got a problem that I'm a little bit too nice, not as in as and I'm too nice of a guy, but I'm a bit too nice when it comes to business. Realistically, probably a bit soft. I wouldn't enjoy, telling someone. And what my first investor actually used to say to me, the key to business is to be fair, not nice. Don't be nice, be fair. And make sure that you're fair to them and be fair to you. And that was a key piece of advice, because when it comes to me, if I often think of a situation and go, right, is this fair to me? Is it fair how they're treating me or treating the business? And then you become far more hard faced. And that's been brilliant for me because I'm a little bit too nice. Where I struggle with some of the coaches is, someone, if someone isn't quite to a standard in for example, barbell strength training, as in they're not brilliant at that side of the coaching, but they're brilliant in other areas, it can be quite tricky to approach that. And I think if I was just a bit more of a harder businessman, I would just approach it and go, look, this isn't standard. But I find that quite difficult, actually. I don't find confrontation with another bloke intimidating, or in the army. I never found any of that intimidating. But actually, when it's someone I'm getting on with on a managerial level, I do find that sort of I don't like doing it. I don't think, in all honesty, that I'd make a great manager in other industries, because I'm too sort of like trusting of people. Yeah, crack on, get on with it. So what I tend to do is just cull things a lot earlier on. So if I get a feel for someone early on, or I'm just like, this person's not quite up to it, I wouldn't allow them to get, any further. Most of the people that approach the gym or approach me to work out the gym, I sort of vet them quite well. So that's good, really.
Yeah, that's good. That's 'cause I'm the same way. And when I had managed a staff back before we had, sold everything and started traveling the RV, I mean, that was probably the most uncomfortable things when you had to have that, you know, it turns out to be a necessary conversation, but it's never fun, So, yeah, I can definitely understand your approach, because I think we approach things very, very similarly that way. So,
Yeah.
so, let's talk about the books. You talked about a little bit in your intro, but what was the inspiration behind wanting to become an author?
So I think this is something that, I'm very fortunate in that from a very young age, I knew what I wanted to do, which was, own a gym and be in this sort of industry without necessarily knowing it was called the fitness industry. And I think from a very early age as well, I wasn't a complete bookworm, but I read a lot. As in, like, I was into reading, not a brilliant reader, I wasn't, an academic. And I wasn't one of these kids that just had my head stuck in books and, could read a book in a day. If I, I'm always reading now and listening to books, but I don't whiz through books. I'm no wizard when it comes to reading and stuff like that. And I'm no wizard when it comes to writing. But I always knew that I wanted to write. I always sort of envied, very good writers, people that could write fiction. I feel I'm very creative and I have a lot of good ideas, but I don't think that I've got the practical ability to write a good fictional story or novel, as in structure it well enough. But that's something I'd like to do. But luckily, I do know physical training like really well. So I've been obsessed. I've read hundreds of textbooks on strength conditioning. and physical training. And ultimately, it's quite, if it's systematic, it's not that hard to write. If I'm writing about a squat, and luckily I enjoy writing, I write every single day. So it's just something I inherently enjoy. And one of the most telling things, which was on a podcast I watched actually quite recently, which was, I think it was the guy that wrote the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. And Mark Manson, is it? And he said that, he really struggled learning the instrument and practicing. He asked someone else, how how do you spend hours practicing every day? And the other student looked at him like, what do you mean? Like you're struggling with that? And then years later, someone came up to him and said, how do you write for hours and hours and hours? And he sort of looked at them and went, what do you mean? This comes easy to me. And he realized then that that's the way that the musician was looking at him. And that's because it wasn't sort of inherent to him. And I think I'm very lucky that, writing is something I really enjoy, even though I'm not brilliant at it. And there's a lot of other areas where, like, for example, say playing the guitar, because I'm not good, it would put me off. I tend to like to be very good at something. Now, I know I'm no Tolkien or great sort of writer, but I know I can write in a way that is really easy to understand. And one of my sort of weaknesses, which is I'm not an academic, I've not got a PhD, I've not got a master's degree, is I'm taking very complex topics and I'm breaking them down and I'm writing them in a way that is really simple, because maybe I'm a little bit more simple than the guys that have got the PhDs, but I'm writing about the same stuff that these doctors are writing about, whether it be plyometrics, which is jump training. I write a book on that, but it's far more simplistic than some of the Russian textbooks that I've read. And therefore I've sold, thousands and thousands of copies. And when people buy the books, it's amazing. I've got professors that buy them, all around the world. I've got sort of universities that use my muscle manual. And these are academics that are reading my stuff and saying it's just really easy to understand. So I think what I would deem as a weakness initially, which was not being an academic, has turned into my biggest strength, which is because I'm not an academic writer and I'm not a brilliant writer, that it makes me write stuff in a way that's very simple.
Right.
And then it fits into my brand, which is all about accessibility, taking the very complex and making it easy to understand. And ultimately, that's probably what the wider audience want.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely agree with that. I mean, I know, coming from a baseball coaching background, um, anytime you can break down a complex activity and make it simple, that's just the key to coaching, I believe. And it's really not that tough, um, you know, to do that if you put effort into it. And I think, sometimes coaches who are great at their craft when they, you know, when they played, it's kind of like what you were talking about with the guitarist and the writer. I've seen, again, going back to a baseball background, I've seen guys who were very skilled baseball players who were not very good coaches because it came so easy for them. It was tough to them. It was tough for them to correlate something that went very easy for them to be a struggle for someone else and to coach them through that. So, how did you develop that skill of breaking something down that's very complex into simple steps and understandable steps?
I think one of the benefits I had was I boxed and Thai boxed from a very young age, and I wasn't, I was good at both the sports, but I was never going to be great, So I had a lot of experience doing that, and obviously it's very technical coaching like boxing and Muay Thai, so where you can kick an elbow, and I did that from very young, and from a very young age I realised that I enjoyed the coaching more. And I think I definitely, although I wasn't a brilliant Thai boxer in a sense that I was going to be a world champion, I had a lot of fights and did all right as a young kid. Um, I experienced that element where I found the technical elements very easy. So I experienced that in boxing where sometimes I'd struggle, like, why isn't this person getting this? But then joining the military, there's a very much, obviously, because, without sounding harsh, I was in the infantry, but a lot of lads that join the infantry are not the smartest guys in the world, right? That's part and parcel of what it is. A lot of lads have got nothing else, or they join the infantry because, they've not finished school. There's loads of lads that I served with, that were kicked out of school, in the early years because they were just an absolute nightmare. So when you join the military, what they do right, if you're taking a lot of lads that are, from hard backgrounds, not necessarily that educated, right, and they essentially, it's systematic. So there's a hierarchy, there's a chain of command, and everything is mnemonics. Everything is like clap, clear, loud, as an order with pauses. Everything's like explain, demonstrate, imitate, practice. So it's that EDIP they call it. And they really, when they're teaching you about the rifle, it's almost like they're teaching you to suck eggs. It's a little bit, one of the funny stories is when I joined, they actually showed you how to shower because there'd be lads that didn't know how to shower, and the guy literally stood there and showed us how to, wash downstairs. This is how you brush your teeth. This is how you do this, and that sort of gave me an insight into, breaking stuff down massively. And then obviously through that you start teaching. I went on to my PTI course in the military, and alongside that I did lots of other fitness qualifications. And that's where I started to realize that, when I was Thai boxing, it was all like I was quite natural at sport. So I was coaching a lot and I was seen as quite a good coach. But I didn't get that experience of then, when I joined the military, sorry, I got that insight into taking people that had no experience or no academic sort of background, as in they weren't very smart, some people, and they had to learn everything about this rifle, or they had to learn a lot of information in a small amount of time. And the way that they did that sort of definitely helped me be more systematic. And, and then leaving the army and coaching beginners, because I was taking, a masses of experience that I'd had, and then entering the civvy world. And then when I opened my gym, I had this influx of sort of civvies that didn't really know much about hard physical training or barbell training. I had to go right back to basics. So I ended up getting thrown in the deep end of just teaching dozens of beginners from scratch of all different levels. And because I got that much experience, when it came to putting pen to paper, I could literally write, everything there was to know about teaching a squat. And one thing that's different with me is academics will often tell you, don't caveat, tell the reader, this is how you do it. Whereas I actually believe in, I'm going to tell you 5 ways to do the same thing, and they're all right. It's just, what's the reasoning as why I do the way this way and you do that way? Why does this person do it this way and this person does it that way? So it makes it quite a wordy book, which goes against all the rules. But actually, when someone reads it, they go, well, yeah, I thought that, but you can do it this way. But actually, that's fine as well. And both works. Which program's better? Well, they're both great. They both work. Which one do you enjoy more? So it's a very pragmatic, very simplistic way of looking at everything. And I just carry that across into my coaching.
Yeah, I love that. Love that approach. So, Jason, we covered a lot of different topics. Is there anything that we missed that you think would be valuable for the listeners?
To be honest, there's I think, I'm really happy with the areas that we've covered. I think it's brilliant. Other than sort of directing people to where I sort of give out free content, because that's definitely, something that I'd like for people. Obviously, not everyone's into the sort of elite performance side of things, but I also give a lot of content on, injury prevention, and even nutrition. I don't personally do the nutritional side of things because I don't find it very interesting. But we do post, free ebooks on nutrition, on injury prevention, on health and fitness. But I'm sure we'll go into that.
Yeah, yeah. So how do people find that? How do they get that stuff? Where can they find you at on the internet, your website, just to get any of that content, or to find out more about what you're doing?
So my personal website is jasoncurtis.org. And that links through to everything, because my Instagram is strength and conditioning course, which is quite a long name, but that's where we post free ebooks from, there's a 300-page mobility ebook, and all you have to do, I've automated it in a way that you can comment on any post and we'll send you the free ebook. And some of them are 2, 3, 400 pages long. Some are muscle manuals that have had over 50,000 downloads worldwide. They've got over 100 5-star reviews on Amazon as a published paperback, but you can get it for free. So if you've got any interest in anything to do with, health, fitness or performance, then it's well worth checking it out, because it's just free education basically. Obviously, it then upsells to my academy where I do courses. It's obviously just one other area that that I'm quite interested in that we've not covered, which is fitness racing, which is I'm actually creating a race called the Deadly Dozen, which is obviously going to be in the UK, but it's quite a cool race if anyone's interested in trying that training format. So it's deadlydozen.co.uk, and it's a race that I've come up with, and people can give it a go and give me feedback if they like that sort of training. But that's something I'm very passionate about, and want to push. But yeah, jasoncurtis.org, you can find everything there really, because it'll link through to my other websites.
Cool. Very cool. Jason, that brings us to our final question. As you know, the subtitle of the podcast is Many Little People in Many Little Places, which comes from the opening lyrics of a Michael Franti song, Gloria, which go, when many little people in many little places do many little things and the whole world changes. So it's one of the little things that Jason does on a daily basis to make the world a little bit better place.
So other than, I'm not going to say the free content is, I would say that the number one thing I do that definitely makes the world a better place, and I would encourage more and more people to do it, is just be really friendly to people. So the biggest feedback I have at my gym over like the other coaches, and this is exactly what people say, is that when you walk into the gym, is like I've got a big smile on my face, and I greet them with their first name. So it's not just hello, it's hiya Jane, how are you doing today? And it's just being super friendly to people, not in a fake way, like genuinely super friendly. And I ask them questions about them, like genuinely. And I think that's the key to humanity, really, is if people are friendly, you never know what people are going through. Even if they're not going through anything, they're just maybe having a rough day, is when someone's friendly to them. And especially when you use the first name, so them, you ask them, and you sincerely ask them how they are. It's incredible the change in that individual. So I would say that definitely the number one thing I do that I think has a positive impact is just being really friendly to the people that I meet, because it makes all the difference.
I love that answer, and it does make all the difference. It's a great approach to life for sure. So, Jay, really appreciate the time. This is a great conversation. I could have went on for a long time here, but you always want to keep things in a compact space. So I appreciate the time. For those out there listening, be sure to check out my other podcasts and blogs at journeymymotherson.com. While you're there, pick up a copy of one of my books. Again, Jay, really appreciate the time. This is a great conversation.
No worries. Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed that.
You bet.